Numb with fear, Kostya sat and watched as someone's chalk, pale human hand slowly reached out to him from the laptop screen. The manicure on the girl's once beautiful fingers peeled off and looked as if a heavy blacksmith's hammer had walked on them from the heart. The hand of the creature reaching out to him from the screen clenched and unclenched, like devilish pincers capable only of inflicting pain and suffering on their victim. Fearing that the creature from the laptop would not realize its intention, Kostya, backing away, crawled back on the bed. The sight was truly creepy and unlike anything the guy had seen in his life before. There was no doubt in his mind that there was not a living person in front of Kostya. This terrible creature with long and jet black hair looked as if she had died in the time of the Tsar and had been feeding corpse worms with her flesh all this time. The eyes of the vile reptile burned with rage, which even the pus that poured out of the sockets could not hide every time she rotated her pupils. Deciding that all this was an obsession, Kostya squeezed his eyes shut and held his breath. But the creepy creature had already touched his hand and almost half got out of the laptop screen. The diabolical nightmare was happening here and now, and therefore Kostya realized that he had unwittingly become a part of it. Trying to dodge the fumbling hand on the bed, the guy slid to the floor, but it still didn't change the situation. A little more and the vile creature will come out and then nothing will save Kostya. The guy understood this and painfully searched for some way out. It was impossible to put up any resistance, because the damned girl was already deader than dead. God, no, it's all just a hallucination. The guy tried to convince himself. But the foul, nauseating smell of decomposing flesh suggested otherwise. The stench was as if there was at least a battalion of rotten corpses behind the dead girl. The deceased made a final push and pulled her legs out of the laptop screen. Looking at the lower part of the dead girl's torso, Kostya shuddered. Her legs were crushed below the knees and looked as if tank tracks had driven over them before. For this reason, she could no longer walk dead and crawled like a plaston, like an infantryman blown up by a mine. Moving her hands on the floor, she approached the guy huddled in the corner. Kostya himself could not understand why he was standing still and doing nothing. Perhaps it was all the fault of the heavy gaze of the creature, which literally paralyzed his will and desire to survive. Everything that was happening seemed to be one well-thought-out nightmare that had no beginning and no end. Nimbly moving his hands, the rotten corpse got close to the guy, after which he raised himself on his elbows and looked into his eyes. Behind his exhausted, rotting torso, there was a long, fetid trail that smeared not only the bed, but also the light rug lying on the parquet. The lips of the dead creature curled into a grin, after which, she suddenly bent her whole body and shook in a fit of unrestrained coughing or vomiting. Unable to endure the whole nightmare, Kostya screamed as much as he had never screamed before. Covering his face with his hands, he screamed like a half-wit, knowing full well that his psyche could no longer withstand such a thing. And the creature really vomited, and right on the floor. What was in her miraculously surviving stomach was as black as tar and fetid as the belching of a vulture scavenger. Shaking the air in a fit of high-pitched screaming, Kostya did not even notice how the door of his room opened and his father appeared on the threshold. Sergei Vasilievich looked at his son with surprise, after which he gave him a heavy slap in order to bring him to his senses. Kostya immediately stopped yelling and took his hands away from his face. There was no dead creature at his feet anymore, and things were in their usual places. And even the laptop through which the creature got out was also closed and peacefully rested at the head of the bed. Instead of the creature, there was a handful of earth on the floor, which was teeming with worms and some kind of parasites. "What are you doing here, son? Such a bedlam, like in a stable?" Sergei Vasilievich asked, not hiding his irritation. Kostya looked at his father and lowered his eyes in embarrassment. He's never been so ashamed before. "But I really saw it," his consciousness screamed to the guy. "Son, I don't like you for something lately. Don't you indulge in any drugs by the hour? The ones that change consciousness?" Sergei Vasilievich asked cautiously. "No, Dad." "What are you?" "No, of course not. It's all a dream. I'll dream about it." Just like in reality, the guy blurted out in one breath. Sergei Vasilievich chewed his lips, then bent over the pile of earth lying on the floor and gently touched it with his finger. Then, he fastidiously threw away the worms and rolled a small ball out of the ground. At the sight of all this, Kostya almost turned inside out. Sergei Vasilievich loved the land and on weekends invariably went to the dacha to dig into it with seedlings or young trees. In the skill of gardening he had no equal, and Kostya knew this like no one else. "Look at you, son. She's so fat, you can't find her like that in the whole city during the day with fire. But I know a place where there is a similar ground. Did you dig it up on the 3rd kilometer along the highway? There is such a plot there. Fertile, humus-rich soil. 300 or 400 meters square. There's such a wonderful little land there," Sergei Vasilievich noted with joy. "What? What kind of land, Dad?" "I didn't leave the house anywhere," Kostya exclaimed, coming to his senses. Sergei Vasilievich just shrugged his shoulders and, asking his son to clean up the room, went to bed. Well, Kostya knew that Mom wears earplugs every night, and today, that's what saved her from an unexpected awakening. Looking around the room, the guy realized that the creature was just a figment of his imagination and had nothing to do with reality. But Earth, why is she here? After all, the blood and pus from the creature's body also evaporated, as if they had never existed. Then why has the Earth been preserved? Taking a broom and a dustpan, Kostya asked himself. Deciding that it was all the fault of a cold and a mountain of medications taken, Kostya removed the garbage and cautiously opened the laptop. Fortunately, no one got out of it and did not pull their rotting hands towards him. Moreover, Anari's mysterious interlocutor was still on the site and behaved as if nothing had happened. Exactly. If there was something, she would have deleted her profile from the site. And so, he sits there as if nothing had happened and is probably waiting for my video call, Kostya reassured himself, but did not turn on the video chat. The guy had enough with his head of all those visions that he saw a few minutes ago. Therefore, Kostya simply sent Ani a smiley face with a smile and began to wait for an answer. But the girl, for some reason, refused to communicate with Kostya and, only when he decided to go to bed, sent him a message. After reading it, Konstantin shuddered. "Did you like my gift? Sleep at the bones, as if by hand removed." A gift? What the hell kind of gift is that? This pile of dirt from the side of the highway? Are you sick at all? The guy thought, but did not answer the SMS. After all, perhaps it was something completely different and the pile of earth had nothing to do with it. Closing the laptop, Kostya turned off the light and stared at the ceiling. The guy's head was swarming with thoughts that made his brain work to the fullest. Kostya still couldn't figure out what a handful of dirt from the roadside had to do with it. And even from such a remote place as the 3rd kilometer? Or maybe I'm just going crazy. Does this happen? My girlfriend disappeared, and I fell into depression and went completely crazy. I see hallucinations now, and at once visual and auditory. Kostya thought. Whatever it was, but he had been sitting at home for a week and simply could not dig up the land. What do you want to tell me, Aniri? Falling asleep, Kostya asked himself. That night, Kostya slept without any nightmares and creepy visions. There were no dead bodies, pus and tons of corpse worms. Going to the site in the morning, Kostya saw that his interlocutor was not online. Well, fuck you got me with your puzzles, thought the guy, who felt much easier. Since the cough and chills were almost gone, Kostya decided to take a walk and get some fresh air. Of course, the day was chosen unsuccessfully, because it was cloudy, windy weather. In fact, Kostya was lying. And first of all, he lied to himself. This was explained by the fact that the guy intended to go to the very forest belt from where this pile of land was taken. Of course, Kostya understood that this was stupid, but he still had no other way out. The guy knew that he had to prove to himself that he was not crazy and did not invent everything that happened at night. Having reached the place by bus, Kostya got off the highway and headed for the forest belt. My father was right. Kostya noticed a patch of oily soil full of trace elements and minerals from afar. Stepping on the soft, slightly springy layer under his feet, the guy stopped every now and then and looked around. Kostya walked about 50 meters, after which a terrible spasm pierced his head. The fact was that this place turned out to be an exact copy of what he had seen in a nightmare. The same inclement weather, wind and soft ground underfoot. The realization made Kostya shudder. He took a few more steps, after which he saw a small patch of soil that was clearly different from all the others. This was noticeable by the ruffled soil and a small mound, similar to the one that happens at the grave. My God, but this is someone's burial. But who is lying in this pit, the guy whispered. At this time, the clouds flying across the sky gathered into a single, black cloud, which completely deprived the forest strip of light. And so, when Kostya was about to return to the highway, he saw that the earth on the grave was moving. Something was desperately rushing out, and the guy already guessed what exactly it would be. And then, a hand appeared, with a peeling manicure already familiar to Kostya. A minute later, there were already two hands. Grave, leaning on the edge, they forcefully pushed out the body of the deceased buried at the bottom of the grave. It was a girl whose clothes seemed vaguely familiar to Kostya. Where had he seen her before? In a dream? No. Then where is it? At that moment, Kostya's brain was again pierced by a flash of unbearable pain, characteristic of insight and awareness. "IRA. Is that you, sweating?" the guy exclaimed. The deceased raised her head and looked with her half-decomposed eyes at Kostya. "And you're smart, honey." "Yes, it's me, as you can see, I'm a little out of shape." "Oh well. You didn't tell your parents about the fight we had 8 months ago, did you?" the dead girl croaked. Kostya turned pale and felt extremely uncomfortable. The dead woman was right. 8 months ago, they were supposed to go to friends together, but on the way they quarreled. As a result, Kostya went home, and IRA went to catch a ride. But what happened to her then? "Why are you silent, Kostya? Scared?" "And I was scared when I got in the car with the 3 bastards. Guess what happened next? I was robbed and raped. Then they mutilated my body and decided to hide it in this cursed forest belt. They crushed my knees with tire iron and buried me alive in the ground. And at this time, you went home and pretended to be offended. You didn't even bother to tell your parents the place where we broke up. Were you afraid that they would torture you with questions?" "You're a sneaky coward," said IRA, trying to speak as clearly as possible with her dead, half-decomposed mouth. "Oh, my God. How could I not have guessed right away? Anari is Irina, just the opposite. There was no website." "It's all you're doing," Kostya whispered. "Well, that's cute. Now, you know everything. Come to me, I'll hug you, my hero," the deceased offered, choking on pus. Kostya instinctively recoiled and ran without taking apart the road. After the terrified guy, Irina's sarcastic laughter could be heard for a long time, having risen from the dead in order to restore justice. Kostya did not run home, but to the nearest police station. There, he told in detail everything that happened to him and even personally showed Irina's grave in the forest belt. On the same day, the corpse of his beloved was brought to the surface and sent to the forensic morgue. Judging from the expert opinion, during her lifetime the girl had to endure terrible torment. In fact, the police had no complaints about Kostya and he could sleep peacefully. Yes, only after that, the guy finally lost his peace and began to see nightmares that did not stop even when Irina's killers were caught, and she herself was buried in the city cemetery. As a result, Kostya went crazy and began to see everywhere the image of the deceased girl, who stretched out her earth-smeared hands to him. Unable to resist the ghost of the deceased, the guy became a regular client of a psychiatric hospital, in the walls of which he could feel better only after a killer dose of antidepressants, which could turn anyone into a vegetable. Drooling, Kostya looks at one point for hours and knows that as soon as the effect of the drugs passes, the deceased will come to him again.